Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding. His church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Well, Happy New Year from the team at Q. I'm Gabe Lyons, and I love starting not just a new year, but a new decade. And I'm so glad you're joining with us. And I hope Q is just one of those places that you can go to throughout this year and the many years ahead to see how to think faithfully, how to be thoughtful, how to remain convicted, but also contribute to the good in our world, to be people of joy, people who are walking forward, creating tangible expressions of what it looks like to be kingdom-minded in a world that obviously is not of a kingdom mind and that's competing against it and distorting it. And so Q is a place where we hope to just continue to fire your imagination as you dream about what is it that God's called you to do? How can you uniquely contribute in the place that He's already gifted you and positioned you with those around you who you have influence with, whether that's simply the children in your home, whether it's your friends, whether it's your workplace, whether it's a career or a platform. We want to be a place that just constantly fills you up and puts courage in you as you lead, because our world needs it this decade more than it ever has. And so we're excited to be partnering with you in doing that. And today we selected a talk and something that I just wanted you to hear today around this idea of irresistible faith. I think we're in a moment where people look at the Christian faith and there's a lot of perceptions. Now, of course, I've written about that with David Kinnaman in our book, Unchristian, back in 2007. And a lot of our work at Q has been exposing some of the perceptions, misperceptions, trying to get into the roots of why do these perceptions exist about Christianity that really have nothing to do with who Jesus is? How did they happen? And more important, how is it that we're supposed to live? How ought we to live in this world today in a way that's both faithful to the gospel, but truly expresses who Jesus is to the watching world? And so this talk by Scott Sauls, who's the pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church in Nashville, it's going to be a talk that helps kind of right-size us, I think, in the context of what God's up to in the world. Not to make too much of our role or our calling, but to understand what faithfulness might look like and to understand how to dream appropriately about that future, but not to put all the weight on ourselves, to recognize that it's God who does the work, it's God who renews, it's God who restores, and we just get to participate with Him in that process. So let's listen in now to Scott Sauls on Irresistible Faith.
Thanks to Gabe for welcoming me here to talk a little bit about my latest project called Irresistible Faith. And I thought I was going to be able to summarize the whole thing in about 9 minutes, but I could only get to the end of chapter 1, and so that's all I'm going to do. And the title of that one is Being Okay with Not Being Okay. And I figure this is probably the most accessible and possibly the most necessary subject matter that we could leave with after hearing so many world-changing, earth-shaking leaders share their stories and their ideas. I've got to make a confession to you. I have a love-hate relationship with conferences. I love conferences because of all the inspiration and all the ideas and all of the great things that are shared up here on the stage from some great leaders. We're going to hear this week from experts in the field of politics, journalism, arts and entertainment, social justice, entrepreneurism, robots and cyborgs, and vocational ministry. So my hate relationship with conferences, however, is that I always walk away anxious, especially if it's a really good conference. I walk away anxious because I feel like there's no way I can even begin to scratch the surface of all the great inspiring things that I've been encouraged to consider. And I wonder if you feel that way as well. If you do feel that way, there's a why to it that I'd like to propose to us, and that is that our dreams are always going to be bigger and more than our capacity. So the Nashville Institute for Faith and Work, great organization. You should get to know them if you haven't yet. They invited a leader named Dave Evans, who'll be familiar to all of you, especially, or at least to some of you, and to all of you who are affiliated with Praxis, you'll know Dave Evans. Dave is extremely accomplished. He teaches the most popular class in the history of Stanford University called Designing Your Life. He's written a best-selling book by that same title. He invented the mouse for Apple computers. So that's how accomplished he is. And the most humbling takeaway, it was not a takeaway that I expected from Dave Evans, from this event that NIFW hosted. He talked about how the human soul is crafted in the image of God, which means that we all are going to have infinite numbers of dreams crammed into a finite shell. And if we're lucky, if we've got 100 dreams, we'll be able to get to maybe 2 or 3 of them in our lifetime. And then he closed that section of his talk by saying, "You're not going to happen." And so we all walk away feeling like that is extremely discouraging and extremely liberating all at the same time, because I'm not required to happen. All of my dreams are not required to be fulfilled through me. And everything that I hear at an event like this is not required to be fulfilled through me. I love that the founder of Tom's said, "Find one thing." Did you catch that? Like, global leader, one thing. That's incredible wisdom to take away from a conference. But here's where the gospel comes in for me, and I hope for you as well. The gospel is a release valve for those of us who go to conferences and feel anxiety or feel inferiority or feel like I wish I could accomplish my dreams like that person or that person or that person. The gospel tells us that the greatest power comes through 2 vehicles, humility and weakness. Not through being awesome, but through humility and weakness. And we've all got people that we look up to and we aspire to be like them someday when we grow up. And 2 of those people for me are pastors that I've had the privilege to work alongside of. And the first one is Tim Keller from Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Manhattan. I believe he's the greatest English-speaking preacher of our time. We can debate that if you want. Matt Chandler is probably up there with him as well. But what I do want to say is that is not what is most impressive to me about Tim, nor is his stellar vision, nor is it the fact that he's the only pastor who made the Forbes top 50 most influential people in the world list. Those are great things. But what impresses me most about this man that I got to watch for 5 years, he's a humble man. He prays every day. He prays through the Psalms every month. He's been doing so for 45 years. He reads through the entire Bible every year. He's been doing so for over 45 years. He's got a faithful, devoted marriage. He's humble. He listens to critique. He learns. The second leader that I look up to is a man named George Robertson. George is here. George was my pastor in my 20s, which was also some of the darkest years, if not the darkest years of my entire life. And the thing that George taught me was this thing that theologians call incarnation. The reason why George in my heart will always be my pastor is because he looked at me in my anxiety and in my broken place, and he said, "Me too." And that was the day that I learned what a pastor was. And I've been loving and following George ever since. And now I'm 51 years old. I'm a pastor, and I'm starting to realize slowly that maybe my legacy is not going to have anything to do with the number of people that I've led, the sermons that I've preached, the things that I've written. Maybe my legacy is going to be that Jesus did his best work through this guy's limp. So I have this weekly blog. It's sort of cathartic. I write, I put it out there, and some of them get a little bit of attention and some of them get a lot of attention. And I think for me, it's kind of a commentary on where the human spirit is in general, just in my little world. When I look at the top 4 most visited, most retweeted, whatever, liked blog posts that I do speaking about my own life. So here is one of them. Coming in at number 2, anxiety and depression, my strange friends. Number 3, self-loathing almost ruined my Easter, and I'm glad it did. Number 4, thoughts on the rise and fall of pastors. And number 1, I didn't write it, doggone it. It was a guest post. I love beer and Jesus. Welcome to my life. That was written by a member of our church named Jeff Hayes. You should check that one out. But here's my journal. This is the list of sins that I've been praying for 31 years that God would kick out of my life, and I'm not free from a single one of them completely yet. I pray over these sins, over this list every single day. Envy, pride, discontent, control, anger, greed. 2 Easters ago, 3 days before Easter Sunday, this happens to us pastors the week before Easter. 2 years ago, a couple of days before Easter Sunday, I asked my wife if she thought I was a fraud. And she said, yes. And then I said, do you think I belong in ministry? And she said, yes. Stop the pity party and start preaching to yourself what you preach to us all the time. You need to cheer up because you're worse than you think. And God loves you infinitely more than you ever dared to hope or dream or imagine. And so as I get older, my favorite thing about the Bible has become this: all the damaged and messed up people in there. Moses with his speech disability, Peter with zero impulse control, his cowardice, his xenophobia, Hosea married to a prostitute, Rahab was a prostitute, Elijah wanted to die, Jeremiah experienced depression, Thomas doubted God, Jonah ran from God, Abraham was a bad husband, Jacob told lies, David abused his power, committed adultery, and then murder. Paul had a thorn in his flesh, spent a lot of time in jail. Joseph and Mary were poor. Jesus Christ was a man of no reputation, lived as a refugee, was a poor man, lacked a formal education, no net worth, despised and rejected by men. This gives some context for me. For some really good news, Anne Lamott said it. It is okay to realize you're crazy and very damaged because all the best people are. We can be okay with not being okay. So my name is Scott Sauls, and God made me a pastor, and he made me a writer, and the worst academic grades that I ever received were in public speaking and creative writing. So these are my only pro tips for you tonight. God chooses weak things. Jesus is not ashamed to call himself your big brother. The well done, good and faithful servant got declared over you at the start line. It's not waiting for you at the finish line. You work out of that verdict, not toward it. You have already happened in the eyes of God, in your completion, in your thoroughness. And so if you let yourself be weak and lean into that, God can do great work through you. You can become the best kind of dangerous, and in my opinion, the only kind of irresistible. Thank you.
Well, to hear more talks like this, we want to invite you to come sit in the room with us April 22nd to 24th, 2020. This particular Q conference is just going to have a variety, every talk, new talks, of course. So many of the presenters are people you probably haven't heard from before, and you certainly haven't heard from them in this type of format. Fast-paced, hearing multiple topics, but also some really deep conversations, very important for the year ahead. And today, if you're a podcast listener, we've extended it through tonight at midnight so that if you actually want to go ahead and reserve 2 tickets or more, we're going to still send you our Christmas bundle. We have a few left over that we want to get into your hands. And when you sign up, you not only get the best rate that's going to be available for this event, but you also are going to receive our Sackcloth and Ashes blanket. You're going to receive coffee, a Behold the Lamb vinyl album. You're going to receive multiple things that we know are just going to be the kinds of gifts not only could you enjoy, but you could give away to those who are around you. So I'd encourage you to learn more about all that at qideas.org/2020. And when you do that, you'll see how to register. You can see the presentations taking place, a lot of the topics, the people who are part of it. We have about 50% more topics and presenters that we'll be adding in the coming weeks and months. And so I hope to see you there for Q 2020.